All right. So everybody, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Amazon's got their podcasts now, Spotify, whatever you're listening to us, we appreciate it. If you're listening to us on YouTube, again, like, subscribe, share. If you're listening to us by chance on the radio, we appreciate that too. And definitely tell your friends and family, rather, wherever you're listening to us. We appreciate it. We have Glen Williams on today. And Glenn has really done so many things in his life, and probably could keep on here for about 2 or 3 hours, but for his sake, I won't do that. But we'll move into the interview. He's got a book out, Bridging the Gap. We're going to talk about that. It's really impressive. I've talked to Glenn at a conference, and he's got a lot of good stories. So, Glen Williams, thanks so much for coming on. This is going to be a real good interview. We'll just say that.
My pleasure, Rob. Looking forward to it.
Right. So, Glenn, for the people that don't know you, can you just give them a little bit of a synopsis about you and the book in general?
Yeah, I was a 26-year police officer, detective, and during that time, I experienced a lot of things that most police officers experience on a daily basis. And I was really active in the department. I became a detective in my third year, which was way too early in my opinion now. But I was a firearms instructor. I taught active shooter. I supervised dive teams. I've done a lot of things throughout my career. During those times, though, and the things that we witnessed, I experienced a lot of traumatic events, and I eventually developed PTSD. And when I developed PTSD, I shut down, I quit talking, and unfortunately, that led to a divorce. And being the slow learner that I am, I tried again and I did the same thing. And, that's the definition of insanity. And that led to a second divorce. And that was not what I wanted at all. I looked at myself as a two-time loser. After that second divorce, I spent 3 years up at my cabin and I started taking a very self-accountable, realistic look at me. I was the only common factor, and I'm divorced twice. What did I do? And what did I contribute? And I could blame a lot of things on my ex-wives. I can't change what they did, but I can change what I did to contribute. And I did that. I even taught myself how to take a traumatic event, rephrase it so it can be shared safely, so I don't put those bricks in the wall anymore. And I tried a lot of things that were way outside my box. I didn't realize how tiny my little box was. And I learned to open up. And after that, I have now gotten remarried. I have a wonderful relationship with a beautiful lady that she knows everything about me. We have no secrets. In fact, she can read on my face what I'm thinking, and which scares me sometimes. But now I travel around. I teach police departments on communication relationships to help reduce PTSD, divorce, and suicide. And I wrote my book, which is about the same thing. And that's a copy of my book right there, which will be in bookstores on December 14th. And it's on ebook right now.
If somebody was asking you, Glenn, what is PTSD? What would you tell them?
It's a reaction of your body and your mind. And I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I won't even pretend to be, not even on TV. But as we go through things, the mind is traumatized. It can only take so much. My son and I actually talked about this. He's a smart kid. His triggers a fight or flight mechanism in him. When he starts to have a vision, or he'll have the feelings come back. I know when I talk about some of the stories that I have, I'll start to cry. Even when I'm teaching a course, I can't help it because it's triggering that deep feeling. It's a mental trauma is what it is, because your mind was not made to see, like deal with some of the things. One of the ones that the kids are the ones that always rip me up, but the 3-year-old boy that I was searching for and I finally found in a pond, and I pulled him out and did CPR, and I couldn't save him. Those are things that stick with you and are not forgettable. And the mind of the human is just not designed for that.
We don't hear a lot about PTSD. Like I said, it's just basically we hear about PTSD from the soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan. Nobody talks about it with police or firemen, even in general.
Yeah.
Why do you feel that is? Why is that? Do you think it's an issue with our country right now that there's been a lot of hatred against police in general? We hear these defund the police. We hear, every other slur or word against the police in general. So if you want to jump into that, you're more than welcome. But my question is why don't we hear it with police, but we just hear it mostly with, our soldiers in general?
That's interesting because my son actually was blown up in Afghanistan. He lived,
Oh, wow.
and he and I share a lot about trauma, and it's a different type of trauma because it's short onset. It's something that very dramatic that happened to him. The housewife up the street chasing after her pet dog that she's had for 12 years and watches it get hit by a car. That's trauma, but it's not nearly as dramatic as my son being in firefights every day and getting blown up. And the police officers somewhere in the middle, up towards the military, because we see things that people don't want to see. And it's a slow cumulative buildup. And for many people, if you've ever watched any things on the Las Vegas shooting, the officers are running in until they start taking fire, and then they're getting cover trying to return because they have no idea where the shooting's coming from. Right. The same thing with any other shooting. The Miami club a couple of years ago, the officers are running in, and that's what we get paid the big bucks to do. And a lot of people just take it for granted. That's what we get paid the big bucks to do. And I use big bucks facetiously.
Right.
But that's what they expect of us. And so I think it's kind of taken for granted, not to mention it's a slow buildup. I read some statistics the other day and I double checked, and I think they're a little low actually, but they say most people in their lifetime will experience 4 major traumatic events. I'm pretty sure that's kind of low. But an officer in a 20-year career will experience 800 major traumatic events. And I think that's about 1 a month. And I'm pretty sure that's a little low also, especially in cities like New York.
Yeah. How are you training? And even when you're talking to these officers, what are you telling them? Because like you said, you've went through this, you're still going through this, you're still working through it in general. What are you telling them in these big cities, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and even the small cities, they're seeing some crazy stuff right now in general. So how are you telling them to get through these issues with divorce, with PTSD in general? Because these are tough jobs where they're working all different shifts, and they're encountering all different people, crazy people, good people, psychotic people in general.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we're sending people that have been traumatized out to deal with people that are in trauma. And that doesn't seem like a very good mix. What I talked to the guys about, number one, when I started, we didn't talk about stuff. I remember training in the academy and they said, the divorce rate in law enforcement is really high. But you're going to see things you don't want to talk about. They're too gruesome. You're going to see things you can't talk about because it's ongoing investigation, but you need to keep that communication open with your spouse so you don't get divorced. And we're all looking and going, okay, how do we do that? And they never told us how. And that's why when I was up there alone, I learned how to take that traumatic event and rephrase it. And I teach officers on that to keep that line of communication open. Number one is we have to open up and talk. And I see now there's a lot of peer support teams coming out, and it's becoming a lot more acceptable to be open and talk. And that's the first step in reducing PTSD. And the first step in reducing divorces is keeping that communication open. So that's step one. But there's a whole lot of things. What I discovered, I used to have probably 2 or 3, 4 nightmares a month. And after writing everything down, which is first step on redoing the communication issue, I had them write it down. After I wrote my book, my current wife knows everything about me, everything. And I have nightmares maybe once or twice a year now. So I'm getting better. And that's the goal I have for the officers that I go out and teach, because if I can help one not do the same stupid stuff I did, I win.
How did you overcome that? Was that just like you said, you took a real look at yourself after that second divorce? Would you credit it to that? Would you credit it to your new wife that she really helped you out? How did you get past all this PTSD? Because, you just spoke about how it could lead to suicide, and that could have been a real option.
Yeah. When I went up to my cabin and I was living up there, I started drinking a little bit. And I limited it to 2 drinks a night, but they were 32 ounces each. Mm-hmm. So I was feeling no pain, let's put it that way. And then I kind of woke up one day and I went, what are you doing? As I started writing these things down, I actually went to a counselor to deal with some things that had occurred. And I talk about that in my book. I can't remember what chapter, but probably in several of them. But I started talking to a counselor and I started opening up about these things. And when I took that look at myself up there, that self-accountable look, I went through some trainings to open up again. And I had built such walls. I used to walk around, everybody thought I was arrogant. And I realized I didn't know I was doing it when I was younger, but I was arrogant because I was trying to keep people away from me. It was a defense mechanism. I tore that down. My wife now tells me I'm too open because I talk too much and I share pretty much everything. I have no secrets, and I actually like it that way. Every once in a while she'll elbow me and say enough. But yeah, start off with a self-accountable look at ourselves. How many people really do that? And sometimes we need assistance with that. That's where the therapist or the counselor came in. That's where this training that I went to came in. And once I did that, I looked at, I can't change anybody else. The past doesn't matter. It's done. I can't change it. The future only depends on what I do right now. So I get to worry about what's happening right now. And so I started looking and being in the moment. My wife taught me that, my current wife. And then I started, before that, I'd take no self-accountable look and realized that, I was great at solving everybody else's problem. This is cops. They're great at solving everybody else's problems, but they're very hard and difficult for them to look inside themselves and see their own.
Right.
And that's what I've discovered. Like my class, it's not exciting. It's, I taught firearms. I taught underwater post-blast investigation, all this cool stuff. And I never had a problem getting people to that class. But now the numbers are limited. COVID didn't help, obviously.
Yeah.
But officers don't want to take a hard look at themselves and be self-accountable, because that's, I think, the thing most of us are most afraid of. And is getting personal.
So do you feel like that's an issue with men in general, as far as mental health, and they've been pushed by the media and, parents and family members alike to say, you're a man, you're strong, don't be weak, don't see a counselor, don't see a therapist, you can't take any kind of medication that might help you?
Yeah. Absolutely. Suck it up, buttercup. You got this. You don't need help. Yeah. I mean, that's how I was raised. I never asked for help. Right. I do now. But, and I think a lot of it is, and I'm going to be just open on this, Hollywood's a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
They put these images out there and they're not real. But
social media too is a joke too.
Oh, social media is horrible. But we buy into it, and we see, it goes back to the overweight female, but you never see an overweight model. Starting to let you know it's okay, but then you don't realize, or I didn't realize, how much they were photoshopped. Yeah, everything's image, and that's what in life. I'm tired of image. Let's get real.
Yeah.
And I'll throw it all out there. And I don't care. I mean, I care, but if you don't like it, too bad. It's me. And if you don't like it, then I don't need to be your friend. That's okay. And, I went through after my second divorce, and I weeded out. I got rid of all my toxic friends. I was kind of lonely for a while, but now I have some very, very good friends, and I would trust them with anything. And that's the type of people I want to surround myself with. We don't buy into the fake crap. And, Hollywood's completely fake, in my opinion.
I agree.
They're selling an image, and they're selling what they think the people want. But a lot of the people don't realize that, I can't sit through a cop show because my wife is always yelling at me because I'm going, we can't do stuff like that. When did he reload? That's 40 shots. Come on. He only had 7. I mean, it's so unreal, but people think that's real. And, and I watch some of them for entertainment value. I realize it's BS, but I just kind of laugh now. And I quit saying it out loud while the show's going on. So I don't interrupt my wife. I get to be polite. But she doesn't even like driving with me down the road. I open up so much. I'm going, did you see that? I can't believe that idiot did that. And he's 2 blocks ahead, 3 blocks ahead, doing some stupid thing. And
well, people definitely don't know how to drive anymore. That's for sure. I think they're just giving out license to anybody that will pay the $50-$60. It's pretty disgusting.
They get it.
And I get it. I see it here. I see it in Florida. I see it all over the place. It's a joke.
Yeah.
I want to go into these issues because people did write in some questions since you were in law enforcement to talk about this. But with the gun laws, what is your opinion on that? Because, there's some parts of the country that are very strict and they still have a lot of gun violence. There's some places that aren't so strict and, don't have gun violence. And then some of them have a lot of gun violence. So should we be meeting in the middle? What kind of gun laws should we really have in this country to really, cut this problem in half?
What's interesting is we already have enough gun laws to address everything. In fact, I think we have too many, in my opinion.
Sure.
The problem is allowing us to properly enforce them. And that's where there's a takeaway. As you mentioned, New York, Chicago have very restrictive gun laws, but New York's going to lose one in the Supreme Court here shortly. That they were requiring people couldn't even go to a shooting range and transport their weapon, which is definitely against Second Amendment. And so they're going to lose that one if they haven't already. I can't remember where that was in the process. Right. It's an interesting dichotomy. Right now, if they'll let the laws that are there and just make them enforceable, and that's the problem with the more laws. They pass all these laws, and half of them aren't enforceable. So all it does is looks good on paper, looks good for their constituents.
Right.
And it's an image thing. Again, we talked about the fake image. Well, that's all it is. Yeah, I did this to protect you from guns. Okay, but how do you implement it? It's unimplementable. By the way, we already had a law similar to that was passed 30 years ago.
Yeah.
My first assignment when I was in detectives was juvenile.
Yeah.
And what I discovered in working juvenile was the kids that were getting in trouble are the ones that had nothing to do after school. And so like when my kids were getting up to that age, I says, well, you can do whatever you want, but sports, art, drama, band, music, whatever, but you've got to have at least one extra activity. You pick it and I'll support you all I can in it. And they did. And although my son went from activity to activity to activity, but he was always busy. And by being busy, they didn't have an opportunity to go get in trouble. Like you, I grew up, we were out playing football or baseball or kick the can or, steal the flag or, whatever. There were 150 different things to do. And some of the kids we were doing it with, we didn't really like, but guess what? We learned to get along with them.
Yeah.
And we had that social interaction with our whole neighborhood. When we did this, there were, 18 or 15, 18 people, whatever it was. And we'd be doing whatever. And some of them we knew, some of them we didn't. We got to know them. I think that social interaction is huge. And like say the kids that are playing video games, they're interacting now. They can interact with people online on the video games, but they don't know who they are. And talking in a microphone with that, looking at cartoon figures on a board is not quite the same communication.
Yeah.
It's like growing up. I was more afraid of my father than I was the police.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I did something before I got home, he was going to know about it.
Yeah. 2020 was a crazy year in general. So what is your opinion on that defund the police and all these other policemen that have, gave police in general bad names?
Let me start with that. It's like, I'm going to start with the thin blue line. The thin blue line, we believe, stands for standing between evil and the community. It has nothing to do with protecting each other. And that's what a lot of people are twisting it to mean. We don't like bad cops because bad cops make the good cops' job hard, make it difficult. The Chauvin up in Minnesota,
Correct.
I talk to cops every day, and not one of us thought what he did was proper. Not one of us agreed with it, and we agreed he needed to be charged. And the majority of cops are charged when they do something like that. Now, what he got was a little over the top because they charged him with first-degree murder, second-degree, can't remember. And in my opinion, looking at it, and after I've learned some other facts too, that he's really OCD. So when he gets on the process, he goes on the process, step A, B, C, D, E, and he doesn't withdraw from that at all. And that's what he did. He should have gotten off of Floyd, gotten him some Narcan, and would have saved his life because fentanyl is what really killed him. But by not doing so, that's negligent homicide. And so should he be in prison? Absolutely. I got no problem with that at all. And people that do that need to be. As far as the defund the police, it's interesting because the cities that defunded the police are now, Seattle is now offering a $25,000 hiring bonus to bring officers in because nobody wants to work there. I have friends that work for Seattle PD. I talk with them every other day probably. And that's what Seattle's now doing to solve the problem. Portland's doing something similar. And if you look in Minnesota, the people just voted down the defund the police movement and voted it down and said, no, we're not changing it. The best thing that could happen is, number one, bring in some mental health people for the officers. Because like I said earlier, having people that are traumatized go out to deal with people in trauma, that's kind of a mix that's not going to work well. And as you're traumatized mentally, you're not as sharp as you could be or should be. It dulls your senses. Same thing in personal relations. I've learned this the hard way. When I was going through my second divorce, I was so preoccupied with saving a marriage, I started making mistakes at work. I was one of the top 3 officers in the department. I was on 2 specialized teams, and I started making mistakes. Nothing major, just minor things, but minor things add up. And then I'm worrying about my marriage. Now I'm worrying about the minor things and dealing with the issues I just created for myself at work. And I don't want to make more mistakes. And then that affects my judgment because of fear of making a mistake. And those are all things that kind of build up. PTSD even adds more to it. The stuff that's been going on this year it's interesting. The officers that have done the things that don't work, especially don't work for the public and for our cities. Just about every one of them is getting tried. What more do they want? What more do they want?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's really a tough situation because, like you said, a lot of these guys are in tough situations every day. And, sometimes adrenaline kicks in. It's, I've never been in that situation, so it's extremely hard for me to judge. But As far as that goes, I better just leave it at there because I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth.
Yeah. Well, here's the mix. And what's interesting is Chauvin was a 17 or 18-year officer. I can't remember exactly, but a longtime officer. The two guys that were with him, one of them was only on a couple of months and the other one was on less. And the one that was on a couple of months, and he's going up for trial here shortly, said, hey, it's excited delirium. It's excited delirium, which is the term for when it's a drug overdose and they start acting like Floyd was acting. And he was absolutely right, but nobody listened to him.
Yeah.
And, so he was focusing on, surrounded by a crowd, he was focusing on protecting his guys. And he's going to pay the price for it because he'll spend some time in prison. He'll be out of a career. He'll be, his life has definitely changed forever. And here's a guy that's only been on the job for 2 months.
Yeah.
And that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Especially since he actually called it and tried to tell him and they wouldn't listen.
Plus, there was a thing too.
Yeah. He should have probably gone and pulled him off, or there's so many ifs.
Yeah. There was a thing too where those two guys knew each other. They worked with each other. I don't know the whole story behind that, so I'm not going to get deep into it. What would you tell people that don't trust the police?
Wow, that's a tough one because the majority of them already have their mind made up and aren't going to listen.
Right. Well, that's what I said. It's like those two, you either like Trump, you hate Trump, you either are for guns, you're against guns. So it's terrible that that's the way our society is now.
It is. And well, I won't go there yet.
Okay.
The best way is by actions, okay, is to convince somebody, because I can say anything I want, but if it doesn't match what I live,
right,
it's a lie.
True.
And so the best way, you probably don't remember the back of the day because I barely remember it. And I'm a little bit older than you. But back in the day, and your buddy from New York will know this, they had foot cops. They still do, I think. And they got to know the neighborhood. And so if somebody came in the neighborhood, they didn't know who that person was. They stopped and talked to them. And they talk. And I learned this when we started community-oriented policing back in the early 90s. And I had a sergeant that was really pushing that. So I set up business advisory groups, a BAG group, or a school advisor group, SAG group, or they had the ones with the hotels, the entertainment, or I can't remember what we called that one, but it wasn't hotel advisory group because that's HAG. But I got to know all these people. My job was to visit with them every week. And it helped me solve a lot of crimes because they told me stuff. But it also let them know we were there. And I still have personal friends from 30 years ago from those groups. And we've got to get back to that. When the cars came in and they started having less officers because you can cover more area in a car. And then as you drive a car with the windows up, the air conditioning on, the radio on, and you're just cruising down the road, not paying attention. I mean, I got to the point where I would drive around with my windows down. If I saw somebody out in the front yard, I'd roll, hey, how you doing? And I talked to him. It startled a few of them because it hadn't happened for so many years. But that's the biggest thing is we've got to create that relationship again with our community.
So as we end, again, for people listening, Glen Williams here. Glen, what do you hope people learn from the book again, Bridging the Gap?
I hope they can bridge that gap, the communication, the walls we build, bridge those to maintain those relationships for life, if that's what you want, and not build the walls that create the separation. And this can be in a marriage. This can be in a community. This can be in any relationship we're in. And if we have, what I also have discovered is if we have a good personal relationship, that ripples out into our community at large in how we deal with other people. When I was worried about my marriage, I made mistakes. When I was married and everything was going good, man, I was the perfect officer. And I talked with people and I was friendly and I was open. And so, we belong to a lot of different communities. We have our family, we have our sports clubs, we have our schools, we have our city, we have our block, we have our church. And the relationship on our most important community, which is most people say is their family, is the starting point to ripple out and make all of them better.
Again, for people that were listening, that was Glen Williams, Bridging the Gap. Glen, first of all, thanks so much for coming on. And thanks so much for hopefully bringing truth to a lot of our listeners here. We know we do have a lot of defund the police people that listen in. So, so hopefully you brought some light to them. And, we always try to, get people from different opinions on here. And hopefully the people that are watching will, respect the other opinion. That's all we ask. So
absolutely.
So Glen, thanks so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate the opportunity.